Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Today's guest knows up close and personal that I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving, which makes it difficult going out to dinner at conferences. It's a little challenging. I am sure he would agree that those who are new to this webcast should be aware this is really not a safe space for you if you are easily offended or by having ideas challenged or by our satire. Today is July 1, 2019, and this is broadcast number
No, Don, it's July 2nd.
What?
It's July 2nd.
Today's July 2nd. See, I am behind the times. I've been reading Watchtower material, and now I'm really confused. This week, we're joined by former Watchtower elder Bob Gray to talk about JW's The Conflict of Leaving. My name is Don Vino, and I'm date challenged, apparently.
Yeah.
Not unlike the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. And I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Winter Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And Ron Hensel is our senior researcher who tries to keep tabs on me. And he's going to introduce the sponsors of today's webcast.
That's
all, folks.
You told me I could go get water, but I couldn't get wine, and then you called me the Rainier Sea Searcher. So
exactly right. Bottle of wine, fruit of the vine.
I'm starting to draw some connections here. Okay. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came outside its shadow. Now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this afternoon's webcast is World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet. And if you enjoy this program, or if it really annoys you and you would like to inflict it on others, maybe you should move to Portland, Oregon, if you like to inflict things on others. But anyways, we won't talk about that. Well, if you do like us or don't, please just go to our website, midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Please don't forget that. Make a note. So, greetings, Bob.
Hi.
And we're going to talk about the conflict of
leaving
Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, usually whenever you leave any group, there is a conflict, isn't there? I mean, very often, or most of the time, if you leave a religious group, now, it always intrigues me that Jehovah's Witnesses love to call they love to call it an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is always kind of an impediment to proselytizing, because I think the average American would rather join a church than an organization. The organization tends to have I guess it depends who you talk to, but it has different connotations than the word church.
Yes.
So it always struck me as a bit weird.
Well, let me so one of the reasons I joined, or one of the things that appealed to me when I became involved with Jehovah's Witnesses, is that they studiously avoided the term church.
Aha. You wanted to be an organization man.
That we were part of an organization that was exclusive. It was Jehovah's Spirit-directed organization. He wasn't directing all of those churches. I was Satan that was directing all of them. So that's one of my hot buttons they successfly pushed at that point.
You probably remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So you probably thought, oh, okay. I'd rather belong to an organized religion than a disorganized religion. But, I don't know. It just seems like, maybe it's just me. But in any case, whenever you leave a religious group, it often implies that there was some kind of conflict somewhere. You were either personally conflicted or there was a conflict with others. Mm-hmm. And then there are groups where you cannot leave. You cannot leave. without causing a conflict, and sometimes multiple conflicts.
That's true, but and some of the conflicts though happen in your belief system. That's a big
You're conflicted yourself.
Right? You're conflicted yourself because what is this going to cost me, not only relationally with others, but from God? This is not directly related, but I met with 2 Mormon missionaries last week. And, we talked about a number of things, starting with their story, their initial story of how Mormonism began. And they have this young man, Joseph Smith Jr., and an angel appeared to him, Moroni, and gave him a set of golden plates that, if they were actually gold, would have weighed around 200 pounds. He shuffled them around for about 4 years, moving them from place to place, hiding them.
Getting really big muscles too while he did it.
Well, he picked them
really
up on the 4th year and headed off home. He carried them, which was about 3 miles away, and along the way, he was assaulted by highwaymen, an armed highwayman, as it turned out.
Highwaymen.
And to rob him of his golden plates, and so. He held the golden plates in one arm, 200 pounds of golden plates, and fought off the armed robber, and then ran at his top speed, but was waylaid by a second robber, fought him off, never dropped the plates, ran top speed again, and was waylaid a third time by yet another robber. And then after he fought him off, he made it eventually home, jumped over a log, and handed these plates up to his elderly mother through the kitchen window.
Yeah. When I hear that story, I'm reminded of how when I was a kid, they used to tell us these things called tall tales.
Tall tales.
You remember Paul Bunyan? He kind of was the definition of the tall tale,
Right. So I had a pail of kitty litter, 35 pounds, and I thought it might be an interesting scientific experiment for them to maybe take that kitty litter under one arm and just jog from here to a road about 1.5 miles away and back, and we could see without even being attacked, if that's a possible thing. And they kept going back to, well, we don't really need to talk about that. We just need to pray if the Book of Mormon is true. So that is their story, and they can't question it. Why? Because they will have a conflict in their mind. There's going to be a cost to doubting this claim, and the cost is, what will God do to me if I doubt it? Isn't it the case that Jehovah's Witnesses have really that and maybe then some as a problem, because they have been told the Watchtower is the only true organization. All other organizations are part of the Whore of Babylon, world empire of false religions.
Another slut shaming the church. I mean, come on. I mean,
yeah.
How do they expect to ever get any converts if they keep doing that? Go ahead.
Well, they do that once they get in there. So the question is, when you are considering whether or not to stay, not even whether or not it's true, whether or not to stay in the Watchtower, the question comes into play: if all of the other religions are false, which is what the Watchtower has taught you, then where can you go even?
Right.
Yeah. And that's when I take them right to John chapter 6. And it's not about it's when Jesus was talking about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And the Watchtower will cite John 6:68 when they say, where else will you go? And Jesus was talking about eating his flesh, drinking his blood. Some people didn't get where he was coming from, went off and left. Jesus turns to the disciples and says, are you going to leave too? And Peter, being Peter, answers, not Lord, where shall we go? Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the sayings of everlasting life.
Yeah.
And I've used that so many times with witnesses who are in the process of leaving. But to your point, Don, once you're in, there's no thought to getting out. I mean, it's not even a possibility in your mind. By the time that you have spent enough time studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, that you are ready to what they call symbolize your dedication to do Jehovah's will by being baptized, the idea of leaving is totally foreign to your mind at that point.
Could you back up just for a second though? When you
Sure.
when you press John 6:68, to whom shall we go? What is going on in the mind, or what do you expect to be reaching into the mind of a Jehovah's Witness and touching with that verse?
Most often, it's with somebody who is already in the process of leaving, and they're wondering where to go.
As in terms of like a place,
Yes.
an organization, a
Yes.
group,
Yes.
and you're saying to whom, in order to stress
It's
that
all
it's
about Jesus. It's
right.
not
It's
about
not.
what organization you're part of, because
Yeah.
they are so organizationally minded. You know, when you start to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses and you say bad things about them, they go, well, what other organization on the earth is doing the preaching work like we are?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what other organization has the unity that you see in
Right.
our organization?
And you know, when I was in my little group, our leader would say very similar things. You know, he would say, "Where are you going to go?" He says the whole evangelical establishment is corrupt.
Mhm.
He would say, "No one who has ever left our organization has prospered spiritually." He didn't call it an organization. No one who has ever left our group has prospered spiritually. And when you're thinking, "I can't stay here,"
Mhm.
but then you remember things like that and you think, "I can't leave either."
Yeah.
That for me, that just put me in this depression
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
every time I got in my car to drive to yet another meeting, every inch of the way on that road, I was thinking, I'm trapped.
Yeah.
And so how many Jehovah's Witnesses might have a similar experience to that, when if
Sure.
that is the ones that are thinking, I can't stay here. uh, do we have many of them being diagnosed with mental illnesses at that point?
Well, there's an acronym that's used a lot online lately. It's PIMO. PIMO stands for physically in, mentally out.
Really?
And yeah, oh yeah, and there are, I don't know how many, but I would guess a substantial number of witnesses who are physically in but mentally out. I just met with one last week. Oddly, we met on Facebook. He's using an assumed name, and I saw that he lived not too far from me. So I messaged him, and he goes, "Yeah, Bob, you know my family." And so we ended up talking on the phone, and he came down. We had lunch. I knew his father very well, and I knew this guy when he was just a youngster. He's now 48, but um, he's in the process of leaving. His wife isn't on board with it. They have considerable assets, so obviously he's wondering if they'll end up divorced, and that sort of thing. So there's so many dynamics to the process of leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. Like I said, one thing that people don't generally have when they join an organization like that is any sort of exit strategy.
Right.
What happens if this doesn't work out? How do I get out of here? Well,
Right.
again, by the time you spent a little bit of time studying with the witnesses and you become indoctrinated, the idea of an exit strategy would be anathema. You wouldn't even think, why would I want to have an exit strategy from Jehovah's Spirit-directed organization?
Mm.
And so there's an instinctual,
Well, and
there's an almost instinctual
and you're
fear.
even instilled with a fear of even considering such a thing,
Oh, yeah.
because Jehovah will, punish you severely, and including just if you die, you'll just not be resurrected. You'll just be gone. That's it, forever.
Yeah.
Dust.
I just did a search on PIMO JW on Twitter. Boy, did it return a lot of hits.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to do the same thing.
So what about the opposite? What about someone who's physically out but mentally in?
That, I may have mentioned it before, but after I left, I got back in contact with a lot of my contemporaries' children that I knew had left. And this one really puzzled me. I'd meet with them for coffee or dinner or something. And these are people in their late 20s, 30s, up to 40s. And most of them left when they were 18, didn't want any more part of this thing. And I get with them. Hey, how's life going? And they've married and had kids and one thing and another. And as soon as I'd say something uncomplimentary about the organization, they almost instinctively defended it.
Right.
Mm.
And I just sat there, went, wow, this is really strange. But again, it's just a product of their programming, even though they're out. And a lot of them, they're out and they're hopeless because they're still in that mindset of, I'm out of the organization, but I can't go anywhere else.
Right, because nobody else is true. Everyone else
Right.
is even worse.
Yeah.
Some years ago, I you talk about programming. Our friends Kurt over at Personal Freedom Outreach, Kurt Gatelman, and several others had done a set of 4 tapes. Jehovah's Witness at Your Door. Paul Blizzard, and of course he was a former Jehovah's Witness, and his wife, and then Ed Havich, who we've had on here a number of times, and Kurt Gatelman were the Christians. And if you listen to the dialogue, after a while you realize that if you are talking with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're going to, at that time, say identically, almost verbatim, what the witnesses were saying on the tape. So if you listen to that and memorize it, you actually could communicate in the same way. Well, then some years later, as I was talking with the Jehovah's Witness, and I asked them how they got in, and they said, well, I researched all of the religions, and I realized the Watchtower is the only one that's a true representative of God. And I thought, I hadn't heard that before from a JW. I thought, well, that's interesting. And so we talked about some other things. And then a few weeks later, I was talking with a Jehovah's Witness, and I asked them how they got in. And guess what they said? I researched, and I went, I've heard this before.
Is that when you asked them, well, what did your research turn up about Jainism?
I said, what was it exactly about the Urantia book?
The Urantia book.
Yeah. And they looked at me cross-eyed, and I said, well, okay, so you maybe missed one, and there's a lot of religions out there. So what, maybe you could tell me, what was it about the
this is where they did their research.
That's where they did their research. Yeah.
Yes.
The Bhagavad Gita that caused you, and they said, I've never heard of the Bhagavad Gita. I said,
yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of a big one. So you might have missed that one. I said, where did you do your research exactly? They said, well, I read the Watchtower. I said, okay, do you suppose that could have been biased at all? So then that took us in a different trajectory of just about worldviews and religions and how do we know what's true versus what's not true. But of course, their fallback is that all of the churches are divided. That's a big claim. Because they don't have essentially uniformity, they talk unity, but they don't seem to understand that unity doesn't mean we have uniformity. Unity means we agree on essential things. There's certain things that makes us united.
We stay together.
We stay together, even though we don't have uniformity. Ron Hensel and I go to different kinds of churches. We have different views on end times questions. We have different views on some of the mechanics of how God does things, but we are united in the essential doctrines of the faith. Doc Bob, you and I, there's a lot of things we haven't even spoken about because they're not essentials of the faith.
Right.
So I don't even know what you think, but we are united because the church really is a family. And within a family, there are certain things that make you family. Other things which families will disagree on don't make you not family. It just means some of your family is not bright.
Yeah. As smart as you are.
All of that is totally foreign to the witness experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so they're not equipped to even process that thought.
Well, what did you do when you heard it? I mean, where did your mind go when people tried to present you with this concept for the first time? Do you think they were just loony? They were just...
No, because at that point I was PIMO. I was physically and mentally out. I spent a fair amount of time being physically in and mentally out, and 1 year of that was as an elder.
Wow.
So I had already read Ray Fran's Crisis of Conscience in late 1993. I didn't step down from being an elder until January of 1995.
Now I can see how. Okay, that's 2 years. I
No,
can see.
well, it was, yeah, late 93 to early 95. So it was a year and a couple of months.
Oh, okay. I can see how you could have two conflicting feelings in that situation. Number one is a little bit a sense of liberation. I don't have to think that way anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, a sense of, like I expressed earlier, which I think if I were in that situation, it would eventually overtake and whatever good feelings I got of liberation would be negated by this feeling of being trapped. So did you, did you go through a personal depression during this time?
I wouldn't call it depression. What really happened, I mean, as soon as I read Crisis of Conscience, I knew my days as a witness were numbered. You know, I knew this was the beginning of the end. And I went through a period of time where I prayed to Jehovah that the stuff I was beginning to learn was not true. I thought that somehow Jehovah, through his spirit, would enlighten me. I would find the holes in all of these arguments that these people were presenting against Jehovah's Witnesses. And the more I looked, the worse it got. And for a while, so I looked at being an elder as a Jehovah's Witness as kind of like being a pastor. I really had a pastor's heart toward my congregation. And so I went through a period of time where, I was learning this stuff. I knew that if I started verbalizing this at meetings that I'd be shown the door pretty quickly. But I still thought that I could stay part of the organization and affect some change for good. And I pretty quickly realized that, that wasn't going to happen.
Right. They won't tolerate a kind of a Martin Luther type guy.
No. Although they will write articles about guys like him and say, how good it was that they stood up against the prevailing religious authorities like Jesus did with the scribes and Pharisees. And just a quick side point on that. I think it's rather interesting that often they will point to opposers. I mean, people from within that opposed the organization, being like Korah, Dathan, and Abiram against Moses. And then it occurred to me that they're doing exactly what Jesus condemned the Pharisees for, seating themselves in the seat of Moses.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So, the feeling of freedom only came after I had been out for a while. And I always tell people God was extremely, extremely kind to me through that whole process. I really, at the beginning, for some reason, had it in my mind, and I think it was kind of a gift from God, that this would be about a 5-year process. And so from when I read Ray Fran's book until the first Witnesses Now for Jesus conference I went to in 1998 was 5 years, almost to the month.
How fun. I remember we had, for a branch director, she's passed away now, Diane Golson. She had been a Jehovah's Witness for 43 years. And her son and her husband went through a time where they kind of had hairstyle issues. They were called to task because they let their hair grow just slightly a little bit long, just, touching the top of the ear. And
really, that's interesting.
It was, and
that's really interesting.
It seems that the Watchtower has had other issues with over hairstyle.
Well, yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the shift in the translation. They did update the New World Translation. We have a sponsor who has a product that deals with this very issue. It's just such a coincidence you should bring this up. Our friends at World's End Theology Outlet are on top of this thing. They want you to know they've got this covered. Well, the problem. Men's hairstyles have gone downhill at your Kingdom Hall. The reason? Well, misunderstandings arising from the New World Translation revision. The solution? Grease your head with classic New World Translation hair oil. Once again, you can say, with oil, you have greased my head, according to Psalm 23:5b of the New World Translation, as translated in the classic Watchtower Society translation of 1984. With this classic New World Translation hair oil is based on the light of the original New World Translation, the one that the Apostle Paul used. And you can get it at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. So you probably use that all the time, don't you, Bob? The New World Translation, classic New World Translation hair oil.
Not anymore.
Oh, okay.
Well, you see how we try to help out the Watchtower, the adherents to the Watchtower teachings, that we can help them get their hairstyles under control by having the proper translation. Just grease your head. Just grease your head.
A minute ago, Bob, you were talking about how you use that word opposer. It always intrigues me. I mean, I guess that word is technically a word, but isn't opponent the usual word, Opposer, though, you were using it specifically to refer to people inside the organization?
Yeah.
Okay, so
you transition very quickly from opposer to apostate. I mean,
Okay, so I always thought an opposer the opposers were people like Don and I. And now you.
No, I'm a supposer. I'm not a
supposer.
I suppose they're wrong. Yeah.
Remember that brand of stocking called Sup Hose? Well, anyways, support hose. Well, anyways, so it's not actually a word used of outsiders, but insiders who are about to become outsiders. That's what it means.
Oh, it's a pretty generic term. You'd classify as an opposer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and while they wouldn't call you an apostate because you never were one, you would qualify as an apostate thinker.
An apostate thinker.
You are thinking apostate thoughts.
Oh, at least they give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm thinking.
Of the doubt, yeah. No pun intended.
Yeah. So okay, so.
I want to interrupt this little bit of banding about apostate versus opposer just for a moment, because we have a little discussion going on here between Francisco and Faith and Benjamin over the issue. Francisco says that one of the hardest things he has as a formerly JW, now born again Christian, is seeing the back and forth conflicts between evangelicals. He writes the controversies, for example, right now surrounding the Southern Baptist Convention, the infiltration of critical race theory, liberal theology, Orthodox sound churches, et cetera, and the disunity. And I have to kind of go back to a couple of things. We have in-family turmoil. That doesn't mean not family. It means family because we're family by, guess what? By blood and by adoption. Those are two ways to become family. By the blood of Christ and by being adopted. Paul says we're adopted. So we are family. Does family agree on everything? No. Some family just goes off the rails, which is in part why we've had church councils down through the centuries, because you've had non-family infiltrating the church and raising up false teaching. You've had family in the church who were deceived and went on to deceive others. And so it is sort of up to the more mature to bring them back to task to say, look, this is not how family acts. We need to focus on these essential doctrines, and what you're teaching is harmful to the family. Would you agree with that, Ron?
I know. Bob? When you talk, I just hear Sister Sledge. We are family, talking about my sisters and me. Well, anyways, we're family, and families have arguments. And look at the New Testament. I mean, just look at the problems they had. They did not walk in lockstep, and they didn't many times when they should have been. I mean, not lockstep per se, but they should have been in agreement on certain things. And because what had happened is false teachings do come in. It's you're in a biblical church when it is being attacked by Satan, when he is coming in and trying to introduce false ideas,
Right.
Satan doesn't waste his time trying to deceive the cults. He's already, that job is done.
That's done. Yeah, exactly.
The only thing the only thing they need is occasional maintenance to keep people in.
I like that.
What about brother? Which part?
Well, you know what? There's a new commercial there. The Heresy Maintenance Corporation.
Heresy maintenance. Yes. I came across a quote from D. Martin Lloyd-Jones while reading his book Spiritual Depression. I didn't expect to find this kind of a quote in that book. He's talking about Satan, and he writes, and of course, Satan, he is most subtle and dangerous when he comes as an angel of light and as a would-be friend of the church and as one who is interested in the gospel and in its propagation. I never thought, in the past, I'd never thought of that angel of light description that Paul gives. Satan is an angel of light, therefore his ministers come as ministers of righteousness, he tells the Corinthians. I never consider the fact that, a lot of times these guys come and it's like they sound as though they're more concerned about the gospel than I am.
Right.
Their
witnesses do.
Yeah, their issue is a gospel issue.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, where do I find this in the gospel? Yeah, so now you start to ask, where do you find circumcision in the gospel? The person who is writing here about this, who is concerned, is Francisco, and he's noting that critical race theory is starting to get in, which is just a subset of critical theory, which is really just a blend of Marxism and Freudianism.
Right.
That's by their own definition, the critical theory gospel. It's coming into the church. So when it comes in, there's going to be a fight, because some people are going to be, you're going to have basically two groups of people. You're going to have people like the Judaizers who are actively promoting it, and Paul calls them false brethren. And then you're going to have people like Peter, who himself, though he was an apostle, was temporarily waylaid by this teaching. He was going along with it for a while, and Paul had to rebuke him. So that's how you know.
As you're kind of describing this, and we're all about the same age. I think Ron is the youngest amongst us here, but you probably remember, as I do, a television show called Leave It to Beaver.
Yes, I do.
And when we talk about these false teachers that sort of creep in, this image of this character Eddie Haskell comes into my mind, right? Because he's always in there trying to corrupt Wally into doing things and doing evil stuff to Beaver and all that kind of stuff, until Wally's mom walks in, and then he's like, "You look so lovely today, Mrs. Cleaver," and I'm going, that guy is such a jerk.
Gee, man, Wally, if your kid brother has to attack, oh, hi, Mrs. Cleaver. I was telling Wallace what a wonderful thing it would be for Theodore to accompany us to the movies today.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Isn't that not that's kind of like false teachers coming into the church. They want to represent themselves as, caring, compassionate. We're so glad to be around, but they're always wheedling, needling, and trying to corrupt, especially the leadership of the church behind the scenes.
Well, we're mainly talking about getting out of a cult.
That's true.
The how you're treated. Here's an interesting angle, though, an interesting segue from what we were just talking about to what we are having this program about, and that is, when people come in with these new ideas into the church, you get a variety of reactions. Some people jump right on them, and some people see the danger right up front, and they start sounding alarms. Other people aren't sure how to react to it, and they need time to process it, and sometimes they get a little irritated at the people they think of as alarmists. And anyways, you end up going through this process that involves a lot of conflict. But when you come out the other end of it, more times, in every situation I know, you've purged. Eventually, you do purge the church of that error. it hives off into another kind of church, which people identify as either liberal or cultic or whatever. They leave, they take that doctrine with them. But there's a process that looks remarkably similar to what you see in the book of Acts when they had to deal with the error of circumcision for salvation in the church. Whereas in cults, you don't get process, do you, Bob?
No.
I mean, your process is as soon as you open your mouth and start saying these things, you're assumed if it doesn't conform 100% to what the organization is saying, you're in trouble.
Well, for the most part, people don't open their mouths because they know if they do, there is a possibility that they'll be out. And the idea of being out is just so foreign and abhorrent to them that they almost instinctively shy away from any thought that would not fit in with what they've been taught.
So in an evangelical church, this is probably where things look so Twilight Zone-y. I don't know I don't know how to express it.
Yeah.
It looks so bizarre, so otherworldly, no matter which side of the fence you're on. In an evangelical church, I'll grow up, let's say, Baptist, very conservative Baptist. I have kids. One of them might say, Dad, I want to be a Lutheran. I want to be a conservative Lutheran. I'm not going to say, okay, well, now you can't come home for Christmas anymore. I'm going to say, do you still believe in Christ as your personal savior? Yeah. Are you going to try to be saved by works? No. Okay. Well, I might not agree with your decision. I kind of wish you'd stay a Baptist, but I'm so glad you're still a Christian. Now that's like totally off the radar of a Jehovah's Witness, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up because lately I've been dealing more and more with people who are leaving. In fact, somebody was just telling me about them last night, I think it was. Somebody who was basically out, and they had been to a church or two, and people just didn't understand them at all.
Right.
They felt like they were being viewed as somewhat of a whiner. And I think people in the churches, unless they've been part of a group like Jehovah's Witnesses and left and dealt with the fallout from that, don't understand what it's like. And the example you just brought up was perfect. Leaving Jehovah's Witnesses is not like, becoming a Presbyterian after having been a Baptist.
No.
It is orders of magnitude more disruptive. They don't, and even my own church, we deal a lot with the Middle East, and we have sister churches in Turkey. And at one of our church conferences, we had a guy from Turkey, and he was talking about how when people leave Islam and become Christians, their whole family disowns them. And I went to my church leadership and I says, don't you understand that you don't have to go to Turkey to see that? I says, your average Jehovah's Witness down the street, the same thing happens. The only difference is his family probably isn't out to kill him.
Yeah.
And I kind of got this attitude like, well, it's yeah, I think you're making more out of it than it really is. I says, no, you don't understand.
Right.
I have friends with grandkids they've never seen. I know people who learned of the death of close family members from the obituary in the paper because their family didn't even let them know. Now, those are somewhat extreme, but not that. They don't understand that when you leave Jehovah's Witnesses, if you have family and your family holds to the teachings of the witnesses, you just lost your entire family. When I left, they lost 2 decades.
Right. There's a family that we had worked with some years ago, and she was a third generation. He was first generation. Her whole family was in, and she would often remark that the day she left the Watchtower and became a Christian, she lost 64 family members. 64 family members. She said, it would have been easier for me if they had been in a plane crash.
Yeah.
because then I could have closure. Now they're still out there, they're quite alive, but they won't talk to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's devastating, and churches really don't understand that.
Well, and it's not like when you have 64 family members, okay, it's not as though there's no chance you're ever going to bump into them again. When I was shunned by the group I used to be in, sure enough, it eventually happened. We'd bump into each other. My wife and I bumped into a couple at a Christian bookstore. And they were like, I was shocked because the wife in this couple was literally within inches of me, literally. And I didn't notice her because I was getting ready to buy my books. And I just turned my head and what? It's like, she knew I was there, and then I kind of turned and looked behind me, and her husband was just a few feet with his back turned to me. And my wife is to my left, and I say, do you see who's here? Mm. And we're talking to each other, and they're totally not acknowledging our presence.
Yeah.
And we knew what that meant. We knew that, we're being shunned. And I just turned around and walked out after making my purchase. And then I just wanted to go back in and say something to them. And I didn't know what to do. Well, if we had, the thing we debated about in the car was what would the cost be if we did that? Because not that we had family or any, not that there's going to be repercussions in our family, but the leader of our group was a very vengeful person. Mm. And he would find ways of retaliating. So.
Yeah, you have that in the Watchtower and the higher ups. And I have to also tell you, for the elders, it is kind of difficult because it is a lot of work. When people start doubting, you have to kind of clean out the congregation. And so you have to go through this whole process of disfellowshipping them. But we have a sponsor that kind of has stepped up.
Well, yeah, somebody had to figure out a way to deal with this and leave it to our friends at World's End Theology Outlet. Do you struggle to find the time to deal with all the evil slaves in your midst? Do you need help in making examples out of those who question Jehovah's organization? Are there more apostates in your kingdom hall than you know what to do with? Millions now living will never fly out of your kingdom hall faster than with the left foot of disfellowship. It has patented technology that automates the process. You line them up, it kicks them out. It's the winner of the 2015 Soul of the Organization Award, the left foot of disfellowship at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time is gone. I think I'm going to need to change the word apostates to opposers, right? Because, or maybe it can be either one.
Well, you stay with apostates.
Stay with apostates.
When Diane Golston was alive, the Watchtower actually would mail the Watchtowers to you if you got on their mailing list. And so she took out a subscription to Natasha A. Apostate. and I tried to get one to O.Poser, but then they stopped mailing them out, so that didn't really work out well.
Natasha Apostate?
Natasha, not
Natasha
Natasha
part?
Right? Apostate.
Okay.
Natasha A. Apostate.
And she got on the mailing list.
She got on the mailing list, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, Watchtower, you've left the Watchtower. You are sort of wandering around in a spiritual no man's land. Many, as you and I, Bob, have talked about, gravitate toward something they want to call atheism, but when you start really talking to them, you discover they really haven't become atheists. They believe in God. They just don't like God.
Yeah.
At least the version of God that they have in their minds.
Yeah.
Others gravitate toward kind of paganism, witchcraft, and that sort of thing. So they are physically out, but they're not really mentally out, are they?
Yeah, I don't know where they are mentally at that point. Yeah. But yeah, I've seen that a lot. I think the ones that become what I would call anti-theists are confused with, or they're conflating God with an organization.
Right.
And so they've never dealt with him personally at any level. And, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we dealt with him somewhat personally, but at a very weird level.
Weird.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, just because of their view of God, that he, lives in some sort of place, and he never leaves there. And the only time that he's present is figuratively through his Holy Spirit, which is a force like electricity. So it's hard to have a personal relationship with a God who lives way over here and only interacts with you through some sort of mystical force.
So do you see comparisons between their theology and deism in this respect, where you have this distant God? I mean,
To a point,
yeah, to a point. In other words, he's not totally the God of the deists, because the God of the deists never intervenes miraculously. He never. But I'm starting to hear or sense some similarities here. One of the downsides of deism, one of the things that made it so unattractive after a few generations, and it led to the reaction of the Romantic movement of the 19th century, as well as the Second Great Awakening, was just this distant, unemotional, unattached deity who is you can't relate to him.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm sensing from the Watchtower Society.
Yeah, yeah. I describe them as being macro Calvinists and micro Arminians. So at the personal level, you have the ultimate in free will. I was told by a circuit overseer at one point that I think I mentioned this before to you, that I had the ability to thwart the most powerful force in the universe, that being the Holy Spirit. And I didn't think to ask the obvious question at that point, doesn't that make me the most powerful force in the universe? But they believe that at an individual level, we have the ultimate in free will. But when it comes to organizations and governments and nations, that's when God steps in and imposes his will.
Okay, so at the personal level, it's absolute freedom.
Yeah.
At the macro level, it's absolute sovereignty, or
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they will always say that they are they talk a lot about God's sovereignty,
So
but just not at a personal level.
They use that terminology, God's sovereignty, or
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. Or Jehovah's sovereignty. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other thing, that kind of puts it off the personal level is that for the witnesses, it's all about Jehovah's name. It's not about your salvation. Your salvation is incidental,
right,
to God vindicating his name.
And now that, to me, that's got to have ramifications for a person trying to have a spiritual life and be in this so-called organization. Okay. Okay, we as Christians, I think we get it. It's ultimately not about us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it seems to be pretty high on God's priority list. That we get saved. It seems to be. I kind of, I guess that you could say, I corrected a well-meaning, Christian online who was saying something similar to what I'm hearing here, where he's saying, he's trying to say it's not about you. That Jesus only came and he only died for the glory of God. You're just kind of an afterthought. This is what this guy was basically saying is, well, no, I don't think I wouldn't get that out of John 3:16. So you start to think, okay, my salvation is not that important to Jehovah. How do you avoid having, how do you avoid feeling like just a small speck getting caught in the the cogs and the wheels of the organization.
As Jehovah's Witness, you don't avoid that. It's part and parcel of who you are as a witness.
So just get used to it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Just
You know,
suck it up.
again, they're not using the term grace, but using the technical term undeserved kindness. It's more about how undeserving you are than on how kind God is.
Okay, interesting. So,
You know, the last couple of blogs that I've done, I've picked up something from John Gresham Machen in his 1923 book, Christianity and Liberalism, where he's basically arguing that liberalism is a different religion. And he keeps kind of revisiting this theme of, if we just look at the law, for example, we can't come away with anything but total and abject despair and despondency,
Yep.
because it is so condemning. Well, as a Jehovah's Witness, that's really what you end up with, because it is all about works, merit, things that you can do. And if you're an honest Jehovah's Witness, you have to look at that and go, there is no way that I will ever satisfy God's holiness.
Right.
So, so then Machen follows up and says, well, and here's the really key, is Jesus was fully God, and he and fully human, and he gave his life sacrificially for us. Why? That we may be with God and enjoy God.
right.
That's the whole point of Jesus coming.
Yeah.
Is it not?
Yeah. So I mean, and here's to me, this is the ultimate in the comparison and the analogy with deism that I'm trying to make. God doesn't even care enough to come himself in Jehovah's Witness theology.
In Jehovah's Witness theology, right.
He sends a substitute.
Yeah.
Where he sends somebody to do it for him. He just doesn't. I heard a really sad story about a Christian leader who was pretty well known. I think he still is pretty well known. And his mother was suffering from dementia and really didn't know who was in the room. And this Christian, he was running his own big ministry, and he kind of felt like, gee, I should be visiting my mom, but I really don't have time. So he sent his assistant instead.
Hmm.
Because after all, mom's not going to really even know if it's me in the room.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, that's, okay, you can rationalize that, but it's kind of cold. And so I get this impression of a cold, far off deity among the Jehovah's Witnesses follow. And it's like, they're so enamored with the rationalistic arguments for why Jesus cannot possibly be God in the flesh.
Right.
And they're missing the whole point of what amazing love this is.
Yeah.
What an amazing love you're missing out. The God himself came to save you in this way. He didn't delegate it to somebody else.
It even goes a step further, because so when he sends Jesus, he's sending not only a substitute, but an inferior.
Right.
Somebody who is created and inferior to himself. And then when Jesus leaves and says, I'm sending you another comforter, he doesn't even send a person, he sends a force.
He sends a force.
An impersonal force.
Right. And so, we're it's like we're really getting,
And the non-anointed, non-144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses never expects to see God or Christ face to face.
Now that you lay that out like that, that raises another sort of interesting side note to me. Okay, God doesn't come himself. He sends an inferior, a created being. But it's even worse than that, now that I think about it, because he doesn't send the first generation of that created being, but a second generation of that created being.
Yep.
Well, and here's the thing. I mean, let's just kind of take 100 steps back and let's look at this in the broad panorama.
I'll be in a neighbor's house then, and they'll be really irritated if I do that.
Yeah, be very careful. Don't go that far. Let's look at the broad sweep of world religions. And in the broad sweep, after all, Jehovah's Witnesses claim that they studied all the world's religions,
All
right?
the world's religions.
All the world's religions. Well,
all in the Watchtower.
when you look at all the world's religions, the tendency is as you go, this way is east, right? Okay. As you go east, the concept of the ultimate reality, the supreme being, becomes less and less personal, more impersonal. In fact, ultimately in Buddhism, totally impersonal. In these Eastern religions, the eschatology of the individual is they're absorbed into perfect nothingness. They become you're a drop. You go into the ocean, and your being is spread out into this infinite impersonalness. Whereas the more west you go, which is that way, the more personal the deities become. We're in fact so personal that there's no ultimacy anymore, that they all become like just giant humans, okay, that are bowed down and worshipped to, like the pantheon of Greece and Rome and so on. Very, very, very personal gods, so personal they have fights and they're vindictive toward each other, and they're just not even nice people to have as neighbors. So anyways, it's like with the Watchtower, you get the worst of both worlds. You get these lesser deities. Jesus is just really a lesser deity. He's just like a big Zeus or Jupiter, who is fortunately sinless. Otherwise, we'd be in big trouble. Yeah. And ultimately, he's going to connect you with a totally impersonal experience, with this invisible active force that somehow connects you to a God who really didn't have enough time to come down here to save you. He sent Zeus or Jupiter or whatever. He sent Jesus, who really is just a really big being, bigger than you. Yeah. So you get the worst of both worlds.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
So what would a God food fight like that look like?
You have to join one of those Greek organizations in
guess so, yeah.
John Belushi joined. I forget.
It's funny. It occurred to me. I held up the wrong book. I thought this was the instead of The Greatest Man Who Ever Lived, the one I meant to hold up was called Mankind's Search for God, where they do talk about the different religions.
Is that the Watchtower? A Watchtower publication?
Yeah,
it is, and it's not comprehensive. It's just sort of a Reader's Digest version of what they want you to think about all of the other world's religions.
Yeah, not comprehensive doesn't quite capture it.
Not comprehensible?
No, but if you have somebody who is emotionally and intellectually in bondage to this organization, it seems comprehensive to them, doesn't it?
Yeah, and of course it comes from the faithful and discreet slave, which we know they would never lie to us and are always giving us great spiritual food. So this is another wonderful tool we have to use in the ministry.
Yes.
And that's how all that stuff is presented.
Now, we have another conference coming up here shortly, which is in part why we're doing this today, just to kind of bring that out, because there are some who may be at that conference who are sort of in this situation of, okay, I am either in the organization physically but out mentally and I don't know where to go, or I'm out physically but I'm still kind of in mentally. I still think it's God's organization, because I don't really have anywhere else to go. All the other religions are false religions.
So you get the Pimos and the Pomies.
Yeah, exactly.
Pimos and the Pomies. Okay.
So this conference is going to be where, Robert?
It is going to be in Bonne Terre, Missouri.
Bonne Terre, Missouri.
Yes, at the Sunrise Baptist Church, and it will be from July 26th through July 28th.
And it's a really big fee to register, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like free.
Oh, free. Oh, yeah.
So if you go to wnfj.org, all the information is there. We do ask that you hit the registration button and just let us know you're coming. That way we know, we have some idea how many people are showing up. And yeah, these have become, as I mentioned before, I've been going to the one in Pennsylvania since 1998. This is our third year in Missouri, our second year in Sacramento, California, and our 41st year in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And this has kind of become a family reunion for some of us. We get to see people we see once a year. There's always some new people that are on their way out. It's really meant to be kind of a safe landing spot for people who are questioning or on their way out. You will meet people who may not have been through exactly what you've been through, but the mental process, there are similarities between all of us as to what we go through as we're leaving. And there'll be some good teaching. We try to kind of split it 50-50 between teachings and testimonies. So you will hear the testimonies of other people who have come out of the witnesses and for the most part retained their sanity. Present company notwithstanding, but
but you got it back eventually, right?
Yeah, but yeah, I just love these things. They're not huge. We also have them videoed and they're on YouTube. The channel on YouTube is WNFJ 2008 because they started in 2008. If you're still not comfortable meeting up with a bunch of other people who have left or are in the process of leaving, you can watch this conference after it's done and past conferences there. We've had huge amount of people watching there. There's over 1,400 subscribers to that channel. And we've got somewhere north of 370,000 views.
Whoa.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I've been going to Pennsylvania one since 1990. And I've never been a Jehovah's Witness. I was a former atheist. But one of the things that was remarkable to me, and it kind of goes back to the issue of unity versus uniformity, is one of the things that I really noticed when I went to Pennsylvania is when you walk through the doors and you start engaging with others who have left the Watchtower, particularly, and come to the faith. Denominations are part of just don't really enter the equation. They're really focused on who Jesus is, how does salvation come about, the person and work of Christ, how do we relate to one another as brothers and sisters in the faith. And although you might over lunch get involved in some discussion on end times questions or I don't know, Calvinism versus other views, but almost never division over those things because they're just not what we're there about. We're really focused on what makes us believers, what it is that we believe to come to the faith.
Yeah, that's true. Most of the people I've met over the years, I don't even know what denomination or non-denomination they are. Right. And it's one of the things I generally, when I'm talking with people who are in the process of leaving and wondering about where to go, I go to John 6:68, but I tell them, don't worry about where, just work on your relationship with God for a while and pray about it, and He will put you where you need to be.
Now, Bob, we'll give that YouTube address again. Someone's saying they'd like to know more about it. So
it's WNFJ, stands for Witnesses Now for Jesus, WNFJ 2008.
Good.
And that's on YouTube.
All right.
Yep.
And with that, we are, as always, we are overtime, but we're not going to pay overtime for that, Bob. So you're just...
That was my favorite rock group in the 70s, Bachman Turner Overtime.
Oh, yeah. They were the cousins of Bachman Turner Overdrive, right?
Taking care of whatever. So, yeah. So, you ain't seen nothing yet. Here we go. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Hammond Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Oleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will not ever, not even once, not even in a million years, be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never, never, never.
No,
All right.
Warning you in advance.
All you out there who are actually watching this, have a great week. And 4th of July is coming up. So if you are an evil apostate, you can celebrate the birth of our nation.
Yes.